When did you realize your mother was sabotaging your life? I was standing in my mother's kitchen on Thanksgiving at exactly 7:23 p.m. when my cousin Jerome's wife showed me Facebook messages that explained why none of my relationships had lasted more than 3 months in 7 years. I'd only been dating Sloane for 2 weeks, somehow convinced this time would be different, and she was right there drying dishes next to my mom, completely unaware she was already being targeted. Natasha pulled me into the hallway, her voice barely a whisper. Something weird happened before I married Jerome. This woman claiming to be your ex-girlfriend messaged me, said you told her Jerome beats women, said he broke your nose once. Her hands shook as she showed me her phone. I almost called off the wedding. I haven't talked to my ex since 2016. She showed me the account. Teresa Villalobos, my ex's name, her old profile picture from college. But the writing? You should definitely know the truth, sweetheart. Jerome is dangerous. I just thought you should know. The triple dots. Spelling definitely as definitely. Calling everyone sweetheart. My blood went cold. That was Mom. I walked back into that kitchen feeling like I was underwater. Mom stood at the sink, her hands red from the scalding water, scrubbing the same plate over and over. She always overwashed when she was nervous. Mom, we need to talk. Not now, honey. I'm having such a lovely chat with Sloane. Her voice was sing-song sweet, the same tone from when she'd accidentally told my high school girlfriend I was gay. Sloane dried another plate. Actually, the weirdest thing happened yesterday. Someone claiming to be your ex messaged me, said you gave her herpes. The plate slipped from my hand, shattered on the tile. Mom turned around, face perfectly calm. You shouldn't discuss ex-girlfriends at family dinner. You messaged her. How could I message anyone? I don't even have Facebook. The little smirk twitching at her mouth. Show me your phone. She clutched it to her chest. This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself. Sloane pulled up her phone. 17 messages in 2 weeks. First from Teresa, then someone named Wanda claiming to be your coworker, then Leona, your concerned cousin. Natasha appeared in the doorway. I just searched the Teresa account. Created 2017. Only friends with women who appear in photos with you or Jerome. 23 total. Penelope? I asked Mom. Blocked me after 2 months. Someone told her I was married. Ingrid? Got a call about my secret baby. Destiny got fired because someone said I was stalking her. How many? Mom's mask cracked. Those girls were trash. Penelope with those tattoos. Ingrid who couldn't cook. That bartender? You want her raising my grandchildren? Your grandchildren? I can't even keep a girlfriend. Because they're weak. She slammed the counter. A real woman would fight for you. Sloane set down the towel, grabbed her purse, started walking out. Mom's eyes lit up. See? Running. Just like the others. Too weak. I followed Sloane. Mom followed us both, screaming down the driveway. She's not good enough. You'll thank me someday. In the car, Sloane showed me everything. The Teresa account said I had HIV. Wanda claimed I was cheating with 3 co-workers. Leona warned I'd stolen from my grandmother. I installed cameras, changed my locks. I thought you had a stalker. At my apartment, I logged into Mom's Facebook. I'd set it up for her, knew her password. The messages went back 7 years. Penelope. He has hepatitis. Ingrid. He got someone pregnant. Destiny. He's been following you to work. The worst was Fallon from freshman year. Mom messaged her for 3 straight years, pretending to be me, saying increasingly disturbing things until Fallon filed a restraining order. I'd always wondered why she'd transferred schools. My phone rang. Mom, you'll understand when you're older. These girls weren't right for you. You destroyed 7 years of my life. I saved you from 7 years of mistakes. That Sloane girl, she left immediately, proved my point. I hung up, started typing a message to every ex I could find on social media. Attached screenshots. The responses came within minutes. Penelope, I knew something felt off. Ingrid, your mom? Holy shit. Destiny. I lost my job over this, but that was 3 weeks ago. Last night at 1 a.m., police knocked on my door. Mom had called them, claiming Sloane was holding me hostage in my apartment. The 2 officers stood there looking back and forth between each other and me while I held the door open in my boxers and t-shirt. I showed them my driver's license and explained that Sloane wasn't even here. Hadn't been here for 3 weeks, actually, and this was my mother making false reports because she was mad at me. The younger officer kept writing in his notepad, while the older one gave me that look people get when they hear about crazy family drama. They asked if I wanted to file a report for harassment, and I said yes, absolutely, because this had gone too far now. The older officer told me they'd dealt with situations like this before and suggested I might want to look into getting a restraining order. They stayed for about 20 minutes taking my statement and getting all the details about the fake Facebook accounts and the messages to my exes. After they left at 2 a.m., I couldn't sleep at all. Just sat at my kitchen table with my laptop searching for harassment lawyers in my area. I found 3 that specialized in family stalking cases and bookmarked their websites to call first thing in the morning. My hands were shaking as I read through their case examples and realized how many people dealt with parents like mine. I made a list of questions to ask and started organizing all my screenshots into folders by date and victim. Around 4 a.m., I finally crashed on the couch, but woke up at 7:30 to 17, missed calls from Mom, and a 3-minute voicemail. Her voice was all broken up with crying as she went on about how Sloan had brainwashed me against her and turned me into someone she didn't recognize anymore. She kept saying she was just trying to protect me and couldn't understand why I was being so cruel to the woman who gave birth to me. The guilt trip was so thick I could practically feel it through the phone, but I didn't call back. My phone started ringing again, and it was Jerome asking what the hell was going on because Mom had called his mother at 3 a.m. screaming about kidnappers and how I was in danger. The family group chat was completely blowing up with messages from aunts and uncles and cousins all taking sides. Most of them believed Mom's version that I was having some kind of breakdown and needed help. Jerome said his mom was freaking out and wanted to stage an intervention. I started taking screenshots of everything in the family chat, especially the parts where Mom was claiming Sloan had drugged me and was controlling my mind. Added them all to my growing evidence folder, which was getting huge at this point. Natasha texted me privately saying she and Jerome totally supported me, but they had to stay neutral publicly to avoid becoming Mom's next targets. She said Mom had already started messaging Jerome's boss on LinkedIn, claiming he was unstable. At exactly 9 a.m., I called the first lawyer on my list. Gideon Velasquez and his assistant put me right through. I told him the whole story from the beginning while he listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he said he'd seen this exact pattern before with controlling parents, and he could definitely help, but warned me that family cases always get messy fast. He asked if I could come to his office that afternoon with all my evidence. I showed up at Gideon's office at 2 p.m. with my laptop and 3 folders full of printed screenshots. His sister Theodora worked as his paralegal, and she helped me organize everything chronologically, while Gideon took notes. We had evidence going back 7 years with hundreds of messages sent to dozens of different women. Theodora created a spreadsheet tracking each fake account, when it was created, who it targeted, and what lies were told. The pattern was so clear when you saw it all laid out like that. Some of the messages were word-for-word identical, sent years apart, to different women. Gideon explained that we needed to file for a restraining order immediately, since Mom had now escalated to making false police reports. He said the fake Facebook accounts were identity theft, and the messages constituted criminal harassment. The false police report alone could get her arrested if the prosecutor wanted to pursue it. He started preparing the paperwork right there and said we could file for an emergency order the next morning. That evening around 8 p.m., my phone rang, and it was the doorman saying my mother was in the lobby trying to get buzzed up. I told him absolutely not to let her up under any circumstances and to call the police if she wouldn't leave. He said she was already causing a scene and other residents were complaining. I went to my window, which faced the street, and could see her down there pacing back and forth in front of the building. She kept looking up at my floor, and I watched her pull out her phone to call me again. I didn't answer, but I could hear her yelling from 5 floors up. She stood out there for 2 full hours, going between crying on the bench and screaming up at my window about how I was breaking her heart. The doorman called again to say 3 different neighbors had complained to management about the noise. Security footage would show her out there the whole time, which Gideon said would be perfect evidence for our restraining order request. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from my landlord at 7:43 a.m., while I was still in bed staring at the ceiling after another night of barely sleeping. The subject line said, "Urgent matter regarding your tenancy," and my stomach dropped as I opened it to find someone had called the building management, claiming I was dealing drugs from my apartment. My landlord wrote that while he didn't believe it for a second given my clean record for 5 years, he was legally required to document the complaint and forward any evidence to the authorities if requested. I immediately forwarded the email to Gideon with a note saying this was getting worse and asked what we should do next. He called me within 10 minutes and said this was exactly what we needed to show a pattern of escalating harassment and false accusations. We met at the courthouse at 9 a.m., where Gideon filed for an emergency restraining order based on the false police report, the apartment stalking caught on security footage, and now this drug-dealing accusation. The judge reviewed our evidence for about 20 minutes while I sat there watching her flip through page after page of Facebook messages and screenshots. She looked up at me over her glasses and asked if I felt I was in immediate danger, and I told her honestly that I didn't know what Mom would do next, but the escalation scared me. The judge signed the temporary restraining order right there, scheduling a full hearing for 2 weeks later where Mom would have to appear and defend herself. The process server took the paperwork and said he'd deliver it to Mom that afternoon, since we had her home address and work location. Around 3 p.m., my phone started going crazy with calls from blocked numbers, and I knew the server must have found her. I let them all go to voicemail and listened to Mom screaming about how I was destroying the family, how I'd regret this, how no judge could keep a mother from her son. She called from her work phone, her neighbor's phone, even stopped at a gas station to use their phone, leaving message after message that got more unhinged each time. My cousin called and said Mom had shown up at his house crying and begging him to talk sense into me. Then my aunt from Florida, who I hadn't talked to in 3 years, called saying Mom asked her to intervene. My uncle from Mom's side called and started lecturing me about respecting my elders until I sent him screenshots of the Facebook messages. Then he got real quiet and said he had no idea it was that bad. Some relatives were sympathetic once they saw the evidence, but others thought I was overreacting, saying things like all mothers meddle a little, and I should just forgive her. My phone kept ringing all evening with numbers I didn't recognize, each one another relative Mom had recruited to her cause. That night, I got a text from an unknown number that just said, "Hey, it's Destiny, saw your message," and my heart started racing. She said she'd always suspected something was off about how our relationship ended, because the stalking accusation came out of nowhere when she'd never even seen me at her job. I told her about Mom, and she went quiet for a long time before saying she'd lost her bartending job over those accusations and had to move to a cheaper apartment. She agreed to write a statement for the court about what happened and said she still had the termination letter that mentioned the stalking complaint as the reason. The next morning, Penelope messaged me on Instagram saying my apology meant more than I could know because she'd been in therapy for 2 years, partly due to trust issues from our relationship. She said, when someone tells you that you gave them hepatitis and then you test negative, it messes with your head in ways that take years to untangle. She offered to testify if needed and even sent me pages from her therapist's notes that mentioned the hepatitis lie and how it affected her ability to trust future partners. Reading those notes made me feel sick, knowing Mom had caused that kind of damage to someone I genuinely cared about. I called 3 therapists that day before finding one who specialized in family trauma and had an opening that week. During our first session, she listened to my whole story without interrupting once, then looked at me and said, "This was textbook emotional abuse with coercive control patterns." She explained how Mom had systematically isolated me from potential partners to maintain control, and that the escalation to false police reports showed Mom was losing her grip on that control. We spent the rest of the session just talking about how to handle the stress, because I hadn't been sleeping or eating properly since Thanksgiving. 3 days after the restraining order was served, my aunt called saying she had something important to tell me about Mom. I almost hung up thinking it was another guilt trip, but she said Mom had asked her to pass along a message about how sorry she was and how we could work this out as a family. I asked my aunt to repeat exactly what Mom said and started recording the call on my laptop. My aunt read from notes Mom had given her, talking about how I was making a mistake, how the lawyer was manipulating me, how I'd regret this when Mom was gone someday. I thanked my aunt for calling, then immediately sent the recording to Gideon, who filed a violation report with the court, since Mom was using third parties to contact me in violation of the restraining order. At work the next day, my boss pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay, because I'd been distracted and made some unusual mistakes on reports. I decided to tell him the truth about what was happening with my mom and the legal situation. He listened carefully and then said, I should take a few personal days to handle everything. That family stuff like this was more important than quarterly reports. That evening I was going through old emails when a message popped up from Ingrid with the subject line, I knew it. She'd attached dozens of screenshots from her own investigation 3 years ago when she got suspicious about the pregnancy rumor. She'd actually traced the fake accounts back to IP addresses in our hometown and figured out they were connected to my family, but she never imagined it was actually Mom behind them. She said she'd hired a private investigator briefly because she thought maybe I had a stalker in my family who was obsessed with me, which turned out to be weirdly accurate, just not in the way she expected. Gideon called me 2 days later saying his dad wanted to review our case personally. I drove to their office where Lionel sat behind a massive oak desk covered in our printed evidence. He spent 40 minutes reading through everything while I sat there watching him mark pages with sticky notes. He finally looked up and told me this was one of the strongest harassment cases he'd seen in 30 years. He offered to coach me on testifying since Mom's attorney would try to make me look unstable or vengeful. I agreed immediately, and we scheduled a full day of practice for that weekend. Saturday morning, I showed up at their office with coffee and notebooks ready to work. Lionel started by explaining how testimony works and what judges look for in witnesses. He had me practice stating facts without adding emotion or opinion to them. We went through every single incident, starting with the oldest fake accounts. He stopped me constantly to correct my language or body posture or tone. He taught me to pause before answering to think about the exact question being asked. He showed me how Mom's lawyer would try to twist my words or make me angry. We practiced for 6 straight hours with him playing the opposing attorney, asking hostile questions. He made me repeat answers until they sounded calm and factual instead of angry or hurt. By the end, I could describe Mom's actions without my voice shaking or hands clenching. 3 days later, Gideon got a thick envelope from a downtown law firm. Mom had hired one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the city. The letter claimed I was having a mental breakdown and needed psychiatric evaluation before any legal proceedings. It said I was delusional and making up stories about my loving mother who only wanted the best for me. Gideon laughed when he read it and said this was standard intimidation tactics that never worked. We spent the next week putting together our response package for the court. Theodora organized over 200 pages of Facebook messages and screenshots into chronological order. We included recordings of Mom's voicemails and the police report from the false hostage call. Gideon created a timeline showing how Mom's behavior got worse after each relationship ended. We had sworn statements from Penelope and Destiny and 3 other exes who responded to my messages. The package was so heavy I needed both hands to carry it to the courthouse for filing. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Sloane saying she'd been following the case through mutual friends we had. She wasn't ready to talk about us, but wanted to help with the legal case. She attached a detailed statement about the 17 messages she got in just 2 weeks. She included screenshots showing the escalation from disease claims to threats about me stalking her. She said she'd testify if needed, but preferred to submit written evidence instead. I thanked her and forwarded everything to Gideon, who added it to our growing evidence file. 2 days later, a reporter from the local news called Gideon's office about the case. The court filings were public record, and they'd noticed the unusual harassment claims. They wanted to do a story, but agreed not to use our real names for privacy. The segment aired that night with the headline, "Local Woman Accused of Sabotaging Son's Relationships." Mom's attorney called Gideon within an hour, demanding we settle quietly to avoid embarrassing the family. He offered to drop the whole thing if I agreed to family counseling with Mom. Gideon told him we weren't interested in settling and hung up on him. The next morning, we filed additional charges for identity theft and cyberstalking based on the fake accounts. The district attorney's office called that afternoon saying they were reviewing our evidence for possible criminal prosecution. The prosecutor said cases like this were becoming more common with social media harassment. She scheduled a meeting with me for the following week to discuss the criminal aspects. That evening, Mom's sister called me from a blocked number saying she needed to talk. She admitted she'd watched Mom do this controlling stuff for years, but never said anything. She told me about Mom sabotaging her own friendships in high school using similar tactics. She'd spread rumors about her best friend sleeping with teachers to break up their friendship. She wouldn't testify against Mom, but wanted me to know I wasn't imagining things. She said Mom had always been like this with people she claimed to love. The conversation made me realize this went back decades before I was even born. I started going through old family photos looking for patterns I'd missed before. That's when I noticed Jerome's ex-girlfriends disappearing from family events after just a few months. I called Jerome and asked him to check his ex's social media for weird messages. He called back an hour later, absolutely furious about what he'd found. 3 of his exes had gotten messages from fake accounts claiming he was cheating or lying. One got told he had a secret family in another state she never knew about. Another received photos of him with other women that were clearly photoshopped, but convincing enough. Jerome couldn't believe Mom had sabotaged both of us for years without us knowing. He decided right then to support me publicly, no matter what the family said. He typed up a long post for the family group chat, explaining what Mom had done. He included screenshots and told everyone to actually read the evidence before judging us. Within minutes, the chat exploded with relatives calling us ungrateful sons who were destroying the family. Half of them said we were lying, and the other half said we should handle it privately. My therapist scheduled an extra session to help me write the victim impact statement for court, and we spent 3 hours going through every relationship Mom destroyed. She had me list concrete losses, like the 2 years Penelope avoided dating because she thought she had hepatitis, and the 6 months Destiny was unemployed after getting fired. We wrote about 7 years of confusion and self-doubt without using inflammatory language that Mom's attorney could use against us. The therapist kept reminding me to stick to facts and measurable damage instead of emotional accusations. I typed while she helped me organize the timeline of each fake account and which woman it targeted. We included screenshots showing the escalation pattern from concerned warnings to outright lies about diseases and stalking. 3 days before the hearing, I got a call from my aunt saying Mom was having a breakdown at the grocery store near her house. Someone had filmed her screaming in the cereal aisle about her ungrateful son who was destroying the family over nothing. She threw boxes of cereal at other shoppers while yelling that I'd been brainwashed by gold-digging women who wanted to steal me away from her. The video spread through our extended family WhatsApp group within hours, and everyone started taking sides again. Mom's attorney called Gideon immediately, trying to use the video as evidence that she was having a mental health crisis and needed treatment, not legal consequences. Gideon argued back that 7 years of calculated harassment couldn't be excused by one public meltdown when she was facing consequences. He filed a response stating that Mom's behavior showed she understood the stakes and was trying to manipulate public opinion. The night before the hearing, I couldn't eat anything and spent hours at my kitchen table reviewing my testimony notes. My hands shook as I practiced answering the questions Lionel had prepared me for about specific incidents and dates. Natasha texted me at midnight reminding me I was doing this for all the women Mom hurt, not just myself. She said Penelope and Destiny deserved justice for what they went through because of Mom's lies. I barely slept and woke up at 5 a.m. already dressed in my suit from falling asleep in it. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse an hour early with Gideon and Theodora carrying boxes of evidence. We set up in a conference room to do final preparation, and Gideon reminded me to stay calm no matter what Mom did in court. Mom showed up with her attorney 30 minutes before the hearing, wearing the same black dress she wore to every family funeral. She wouldn't make eye contact with me in the hallway, but I could see her clutching a tissue, already starting her victim performance. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with just a few rows of seats behind the plaintiff and defendant tables. The judge entered and spent 40 minutes silently reviewing our evidence binders while everyone sat in tense silence. She flipped through hundreds of pages of Facebook messages and fake account documentation, asking occasional questions about dates and account creation times. She seemed particularly disturbed when she read about Mom harassing Fallon for 3 straight years until she filed a restraining order and transferred schools. The judge asked Gideon specific questions about the identity theft aspects and whether we had proof Mom created all the accounts herself. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand feeling disconnected from my body. I spent an hour answering questions about each relationship and how it ended while Mom gasped and cried dramatically behind me. The judge had to warn her twice about disrupting the proceedings when she started sobbing loudly during my description of finding the messages. I stayed calm, even when Mom whispered loud enough for everyone to hear that I was lying about everything. I focused on Lionel's training and stuck to facts without getting emotional, even when describing the moment I realized my own mother had been sabotaging me. Penelope testified next via video call from her new city, explaining how the hepatitis lie made her afraid to date for 2 years. She showed medical records proving she never had hepatitis and therapy notes, documenting the psychological damage from thinking she'd infected someone. Her therapist also testified about treating Penelope for trust issues and anxiety stemming directly from the false disease claim. Penelope cried when she described getting tested multiple times because she couldn't believe the results were negative after being so convinced she was sick. Destiny testified in person wearing her old bartender uniform to show the job she lost because of Mom's stalking claims. She brought pay stubs showing 6 months without income and receipts for the new apartment she had to rent after becoming terrified I was following her. She explained how Mom's messages made her install security cameras and change her daily routine to avoid me, even though we'd ended things amicably. She testified that losing her job at the upscale bar meant starting over at a dive bar for half the tips she used to make. Mom's attorney stood up for closing arguments, claiming she was just being a protective mother whose methods were misguided but well-intentioned. He argued that the Facebook messages were poorly executed attempts to protect me from women who weren't right for me, and that I was exaggerating normal family concern into something sinister. The judge called Mom to take the stand next, and she stood up slowly, already dabbing at her eyes with the tissue she'd been clutching. She walked to the witness stand, taking tiny steps like she was too weak to move properly, and had to grip the railing for support, even though I'd seen her power walking at the mall just last week. Her attorney asked her to state her name for the record, and she could barely get it out between the sobs that started before she even sat down. She launched into this whole speech about how she gave up her career to raise me and how she never remarried after Dad died because she wanted to focus on being the best mother possible. The judge had to remind her twice to actually answer the questions her attorney was asking instead of just rambling about her sacrifices. When he finally got her to address the Facebook accounts, she admitted she'd created maybe 1 or 2 profiles, but only to warn girls who seemed wrong for me. She kept insisting she never sent threats or mean messages, just helpful warnings about things they should know, and she actually seemed to believe this version of events. Her attorney led her through this rehearsed story about how she was just being protective and maybe went a little too far, but it all came from love. Gideon stood up for cross-examination, and Mom's whole body tensed up as he approached with a stack of printed messages. He started asking her about specific accounts, and at first, she stuck to her story about only creating 1 or 2, but then he showed her the metadata proving the Teresa account was created from her IP address. She tried to say maybe someone else used her computer, but Gideon pulled out records showing the account was accessed hundreds of times from her phone. He asked about the Wanda account, and she denied it until he showed messages sent while she was logged into her real Facebook on the same device. Each piece of evidence made her story fall apart more, and she kept contradicting herself about which accounts she made and when. First, she said she only messaged Sloane, but then Gideon showed her messages to Penelope from 5 years ago. She claimed those were different because Penelope had tattoos and wasn't suitable, but then had to explain why she lied about hepatitis, instead of just saying that. By the time Gideon showed evidence of all 23 fake accounts, her attorney was slumping in his chair, and Mom had given up denying anything. She finally admitted she created all of them, but kept insisting she was protecting me from girls who would have ruined my life. The judge leaned forward and asked Mom directly why she thought it was appropriate to lie about diseases and pregnancies and secret babies. Mom straightened up and said the exact words that made even her own attorney close his eyes in defeat. She said a mother knows best, and sometimes you have to use creative methods to protect your children from their own bad judgment. The judge's face went completely still, and she asked Mom if she felt any remorse for the damage she'd caused to these women's lives. Mom said they should thank her for saving them from wasting time on a relationship that wouldn't have worked anyway. The judge asked about Destiny losing her job, and Mom actually said that proved she wasn't stable enough to date me if she believed anonymous messages so easily. I could see the court reporter's eyes get wider with each answer, and even the bailiff was shaking his head slightly. The judge asked if Mom understood that identity theft and harassment were crimes, and Mom said she didn't think motherly concern could be criminal. Her attorney tried to redirect and get her to express some remorse, but Mom doubled down, saying she'd do it all again to protect me from unsuitable women. Gideon stood for closing arguments and laid out the whole 7-year pattern, using a timeline he'd prepared, showing how Mom's behavior escalated after each relationship. He pointed out that she showed zero remorse and actually seemed proud of destroying these women's lives, including causing one to transfer schools and another to lose her livelihood. He emphasized that Mom still didn't understand what she'd done wrong and would absolutely continue, if not stopped by legal intervention. He requested the maximum 5-year restraining order duration and asked the judge to refer the case for criminal prosecution given the severity and duration of the harassment. Mom's attorney made his closing argument about mental health issues and suggested Mom needed treatment, not punishment. He actually proposed family counseling, which made me laugh out loud in the courtroom, and the judge had to bang her gavel to restore order. The attorney argued that Mom's behavior came from misguided love and suggested a shorter restraining order with mandatory therapy would be more appropriate than criminal charges. The judge announced a 15-minute recess to review everything, and Mom's attorney hugged her while she cried about how unfair everyone was being. I sat with Gideon and Theodora, who assured me the judge seemed to understand the severity of what Mom had done based on her questions. When the judge returned, she spent 10 minutes detailing her decision and didn't hold back about Mom's complete lack of accountability. She granted the full 5-year restraining order with no contact allowed through third parties and recommended the case for criminal prosecution on multiple counts of identity theft and cyberstalking. Mom collapsed in her chair, wailing about how I was destroying our family and had to be physically supported by her attorney and the bailiff to leave the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered after someone tipped them off about the case, and they rushed toward us with cameras and microphones. I told them I was just glad it was over and let Gideon handle their questions, while Theodora walked me to my car through the back exit to avoid the crowd. That evening, my phone started blowing up with messages from the family group chat, where Mom's sisters were calling me heartless and saying I'd betrayed my own mother. Jerome posted the actual court decision document and told everyone to read the evidence before judging, which shut down most of the critics pretty quickly. Some relatives still insisted I should have handled it privately, but Jerome kept posting screenshots of the fake messages until even Mom's biggest supporters went quiet. The next morning, the district attorney's office called to confirm they were filing criminal charges for identity theft and cyberstalking based on the evidence from the restraining order hearing. The prosecutor said Mom faced up to 3 years in prison if convicted on all counts, though first-time offenders usually got probation with strict conditions. That night, I actually slept through until morning for the first time in months, without waking up anxious about what Mom might be doing. My therapist called it a normal response once victims get legal protection and validation that what happened to them was real and serious. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Sloan while I was making breakfast. She said she'd been following everything through mutual friends and was proud of me for standing up to Mom and protecting other women from going through what we did. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee next week to talk, making it clear it would just be as friends since she wasn't ready for anything more after everything that happened. I texted back yes immediately, and we set up a time for the following Tuesday at the place near campus where we'd had our second date. The coffee meeting went better than I expected, with Sloan actually laughing about some of the crazier messages Mom had sent her, and both of us comparing notes on the fake accounts. She told me she'd started seeing someone new, but wanted me to know she didn't blame me for what Mom did and hoped I was getting the help I needed. 3 days after coffee with Sloan, Gideon called saying Mom's criminal attorney wanted to discuss a plea deal where she'd plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts of cyberstalking if I agreed to support probation instead of jail time. The attorney emphasized Mom had no prior record and was already enrolled in therapy sessions twice a week, plus attending a support group for parents with boundary issues. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds before telling Gideon I just wanted this whole thing over and didn't need revenge, just for it to stop. Gideon negotiated the terms carefully, making sure the probation would include strict monitoring of all electronic devices and a complete ban on creating any social media accounts for the full 3 years. The criminal hearing happened 2 weeks later in a smaller courtroom with just the judge, attorneys, Mom, and me present, since we'd already agreed to the plea deal. Mom stood when instructed and admitted guilt to 2 counts of cyberstalking in a voice so quiet the judge had to ask her to repeat herself louder for the court reporter. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced her to 3 years probation with mandatory weekly therapy sessions for the first year, then monthly check-ins after that. She had to surrender her laptop, tablet, and smartphone to the probation office, who would install monitoring software before returning them, and any attempt to create social media accounts would violate probation and send her straight to jail. Mom cried through the whole thing, but signed all the paperwork without arguing, while her attorney rubbed her back and whispered that it would be okay. 6 months passed faster than I expected, with therapy helping me process everything, and work finally getting back to normal without the constant stress. I met someone new at Jerome's birthday party, a teacher named Claire, who Jerome's wife worked with at the elementary school. I told Claire the whole Mom story on our 3rd date, showing her some of the court documents to prove I wasn't making it up. She took it surprisingly well, even joking that at least she didn't have to worry about meeting my mother anytime soon, since the restraining order was still active. We started officially dating a month later and made our social media profiles private as a precaution, though honestly, the restraining order and probation monitoring meant Mom couldn't contact anyone even if she wanted to. Claire moved some clothes into my apartment after 3 months, and we developed a running joke about Mom proofing everything, from checking privacy settings to screening unknown numbers. Jerome called me one morning about 8 months after the criminal hearing to tell me Natasha had given birth to a healthy baby girl the night before. They'd decided not to tell Mom until after the birth to avoid any drama or attempts at manipulation during the pregnancy. The rest of the family found out through Facebook photos, and most people seemed to understand why Jerome kept it quiet, though a few aunts complained about not being told sooner. Mom found out through one of her sisters, who called to tell her she was a grandmother, and apparently she cried for 3 days straight, according to the sister who felt guilty about it. Jerome and Natasha sent Mom one photo through her sister, but made it clear she wouldn't be meeting the baby until the restraining order expired in 4 years. Around the 10-month mark after the hearing, my boss pulled me into his office to tell me I was getting promoted to senior analyst with a 20% raise. He mentioned my performance had improved dramatically over the past year, and I'd become one of the most reliable people on the team. My therapist wasn't surprised when I told her, explaining that removing a major source of stress often leads to significant improvements in other areas of life. We switched from weekly sessions to monthly check-ins since I was processing everything well and didn't need as much support anymore. A full year after the court hearing, Claire and I signed a lease together on a 2-bedroom apartment closer to her school, with a small balcony where we could grow herbs. We spent a whole weekend moving boxes and setting up furniture, and for the first time in almost a decade, I felt genuinely excited about building a future with someone. Claire's parents helped us move, and her dad pulled me aside to say he'd heard about my situation and respected how I'd handled it. Looking back now at everything that happened, speaking up about Mom's behavior was the hardest thing I've ever done, but completely worth the pain of going through it. I have real relationships now with people who know my whole story and still want to be with me, and I finally understand what actual trust feels like when you're not constantly waiting for sabotage. Thanks for hanging out and wondering about stuff with me today. Really enjoyed sharing all those curious little moments together. Until next time, like the video, it helps more than you think.